Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I'm Molly Jones, the Executive Director of Sustainable Princeton, and we're delighted to have you join us for our Ask an Expert About EVs, how to choose, charge, and change. We have two great experts this evening that I know you'll learn a lot from. So looking forward to sharing that information with you. Before we get started, we wanted to ask you to fill out a quick poll to understand where you are with your EV purchasing. The poll should now launch and you're able to provide your personal responses. We'll keep this up for a minute for everyone to chime in. Great, it looks like we've had about half of you already chime in, so thank you. We'll give it a few more moments. It's looking like answers are really coming in across the board. So it looks like we have a 8% looking at affordability. Driving range is a concern for about a fifth of those on the line. Home charging, 8%. Then we have another fifth looking to learn more about rebates. EV models is got a good draw at 30%, and then public charging. So we will look forward to touching base on these topics. Thank you so much for, here we go. Okay, thank you. All right, hold on one moment. Looks like our presentation not moving forward. So a couple bits on housekeeping before we get too far into this. If you have to drop off or know someone who'd like to hear this program but was unable to join this evening, these Ask an Expert programs are available through our website under the Events tab, so feel free to come on back and check out the video. Also, on this webinar, if you have questions or comments, please enter them in the Q&A section. What's going to happen this evening is we're going to have a couple of presentations that'll run, and then after that there will be a time for Q&A. Please put all questions and comments into that section so we're able to share them. If you use a thumbs up on any of the questions that have been asked, that will let us know that you are also interested in knowing the answer to that question, and so we'll be sure to prioritize for those for you. So just real quick about Sustainable Princeton for those who may not know. As you see, our mission is to support Princeton in developing and implementing strategies that positively impact the environment. We work in the three areas that are noted here: reducing greenhouse gas emissions, working on resiliency, and then also protecting the local ecosystem. We are a nonprofit and are definitely grateful for financial support. If you enjoyed tonight's program and like to see more of these, please consider making a donation. You can do so through our website or by clicking on the green button at sustainableprinceton.org. I also want to make a note that we encourage you all, in addition to tonight's program, we're actually going to have an in-person event. This is our first large in-person event. We're going to have a wonderful ride and drive on October 9th at the Princeton Shopping Center located on Harrison Street in the town of Princeton. We'll have a number of dealers there present bringing their cars for you to drive. We're also going to have a number of EV EV owners there present with their vehicles who can answer questions about their experience of owning a vehicle. A good number of electric bikes will also be there, as one vendor will be bringing them to let you do a test ride of electric bikes. And then finally, there will be music. So we encourage you to bring your chairs, come out for hopefully a wonderful evening of learning about electric vehicles with music, and then join us for dinner at the shopping center. So with that, I'm going to hand our program over to Christine Symington, our program director.
Thank you, Molly. So why are we here tonight? Princeton has a goal to reduce community-wide emissions 80% by 2050. And you can see by this chart that we have a lot of work to do. Next slide. Greenhouse gas emissions from Princeton's transportation sector was 34% of our community-based emissions in 2019. This means that if we're going to do our part to reduce our local and global emissions, we must tackle this sector. And the co-benefit of doing this here in Princeton is also improved local air quality. Next slide. So in our climate action plan, there is a land use and transportation section. And in this section, we have a vision about how to go about reducing emissions in the transportation sector. And that vision is that all Princeton community members have access to safe, affordable, low carbon housing and transportation. Next slide. Now, while this evening is about electric vehicles, it's crucial to point out that it is just one part of a mobility hierarchy to reduce emissions from our transportation sector. Replacing a gas-powered vehicle with an electric or hybrid electric vehicle does not eliminate the need to replace vehicle trips to get to our destinations by walking, cycling, using public transit, or adopting and promoting lower carbon transportation options like ride hailing and car sharing. The actions in the Climate Action Plan, land use and transportation sector follow this hierarchy. Next slide. So electric vehicle adoption is growing. In 2019, there were 725 EVs registered in Princeton. And in New Jersey, we've seen a drastic growth in EV registrations. There were 30,017 EVs and plug-in hybrids registered in New Jersey in 2019 compared to just 338 8 years ago. Replacing gas-powered vehicles with electric ones requires charging infrastructure too. We're fortunate to have a number of charging stations available to the public within the municipality of Princeton, and very likely more to come. Spring Street Garage, the Princeton Shopping Center, and the Chambers Street Garage all have 2 level 2 charging stations. And if you don't know what level 2 means, our experts will explain that this evening. So now that we've given you the backdrop for tonight's event, I will turn it over to my colleague, Jenny Lundmer, to introduce our experts and lead the Q&A you've all been waiting for. Over to you, Jenny.
Thank you, Christine. And hello, everybody. I am very excited to introduce our speakers tonight. First up, we have Eve Gabel-Frank. She's an associate at Gabel Associates. And she utilizes her diverse skill set to provide support to Charge EVC. Some of her tasks there include research support for comprehensive EV studies, membership recruit, marketing activities, including maintaining an active presence on social media platforms, attending conferences, and facilitating ride and drive events like the one that we're going to be having soon. She also supports regulatory matters through interaction with state agencies. In addition, Ms. Gabel-Frank performs geographic analysis for various studies and projects. So we are very delighted to have Eve with us tonight. We also have Tom Moloughney. He is a passionate electric vehicle advocate, an industry consultant, and a former director at Plug-in America. Tom has been driving EVs since 2009 and has driven a total of 300,000 all-electric miles. So we know he has a lot to talk about. He is an editor for the EV news site InsideEVs.com and has published over 1,000 articles on electric vehicles and EV policy. Tom is also the East Coast trainer for the Plugstar Electric Vehicle Dealership Certification Program. So welcome to both of you. If we could move to the next slide, Molly. And we will start first with Ms. Gabel-Frank. Eve, at this point, could you start sharing your slides and take over?
So I just tried to turn my video on and it says, oh, never mind. Got it. Okay.
Yay.
All right, how's that look?
Perfect.
All right. So first of all, thank you for having me. Just to quickly reintroduce myself and give a bit of context, my name is Eve Gabel-Frank, and I'm here representing Charge EVC. So Charge EVC is a coalition formed about 5 years ago in New Jersey that advocates for electrification of the transportation sector generally. So we have about 35 members. We have all of the investor-owned utilities in New Jersey, environmental organizations, labor organizations, charging station companies, Tesla, New Jersey Coalition of Automotive Retailers that represents all the new car dealers in the state. So it's a really diverse group. You wouldn't expect them all to be working together, but we're all working together to move transportation electrification forward in New Jersey. We also have some associate members that show us support, and Princeton is one of them. So I'm going to sort of give you a good background of what the current EV landscape is in New Jersey. Hopefully that sort of sets a good basis for Tom's presentation. So first, I'm just going to review New Jersey's new EV law. So this law was passed with bipartisan support this past January, and then it was signed into law by Governor Murphy. Some of the elements of it, which I'll go into more detail, are setting goals to put more EVs on the road, increase in publicly accessible charging infrastructure, electrifying fleets, and establishing an EV rebate program. So let me go through each of those. So the first goal that I mentioned was putting more electric vehicles on the road. This law sets a goal to have 330,000 plug-in electric vehicles on the road by 2025. That includes any electric vehicle that can plug in. So a plug-in hybrid counts towards that goal. Just to give you some context, as Christine actually just said, as of December 2019, there were 30,000 electric vehicles registered in New Jersey. So while we have had a big leap, this number has to increase tenfold in the next next 5 years. So we do have a lot of work to do to get to that point. And then you see we're tasked with sort of incrementally increasing that number to 2 million by 2035. And then by 2040, 85% of sales or leases should be plug-in electric vehicles. Next is goals to increase publicly accessible charging infrastructure. So the law sets goals for both level 2 charging and for DC fast charging. Level 2 charging is a bit slower. You usually leave it plugged in either at home or at work or somewhere where you're going to be leaving your car for a longer period of time. And it charges your car over a longer period. So the law sets a goal to have 1,000 level 2 chargers that are publicly accessible by 2025. And then it sets a goal to have 400 DC fast chargers of at least 150 kilowatts by 2025. So I put a little chart here that sort of shows you where we are right now. Right now, there are 328 level 2 charging stations that are compliant with the goals of the law, as in accessible to everyone. Tesla charging stations don't count because only Teslas can charge at their charging stations. So it has to be a station that all EVs can charge at. So right now we're at 328. The goal is 1,000. I also want to point out there are 65 DC fast charging station locations in the state that aren't compliant with that 150 kilowatt limit, but they're still there. They're still publicly accessible. They just don't reach that compliance that the law has. And then as of last week, there are 6 locations out of that goal of 200 that are in place right now that reach that 150 kilowatt compliance. So there's a lot of work to be done on that. I'll go into a little later how we're sort of trying to reach these goals. We're not expecting it to just happen organically. A bit more on electrification of fleets. The law sets a goal for state-owned vehicles. So it sets a goal for 25% of state-owned light-duty vehicles should be plugged in by 2025.
Eve,
And it
I'm
should be
sorry.
zero emission by 2024. And then that ratchets up to.
Eve, I've lost you a couple of times.
That 100% of the notification that my internet connection's bad.
Yeah, so you might just want to back up like the last minute that you were talking.
Should I go to the last slide?
Yeah, sorry, you were breaking up then as well.
All right. So just to quickly reiterate, because I'm not sure if people missed this, currently we have 328 compliant level 2 charging stations. We need to get to 1,000, and we have 6 compliant DC fast charging stations. We need to get to 200. How goals.
Sorry, Evie. Eve, it sounds like you're breaking up again. Should we go ahead and switch to Tom while Eve tries to work out the technical issues? Maybe she'll need to log in and try again. Tom?
Hi, I can hear you again.
Oh, now you can. Okay. Do you want to keep trying? We'll try one more time.
Yes, and if it happens again, I'll try to connect to my hotspot. Am I still here?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, you can hear me?
Yes.
All right. Let's try to share my screen again. Can you see my screen? And
yeah, we do see the screen, but you are breaking up again, Eve. How about if we switch to Tom? And then I know we've got Perry on hand helping us with the technical issues. So maybe you can check the chat and see if his recommendations could work for you. because we'd love to get back and hear the rest of your story, but why don't we try to switch to Tom and see if you can get that settled first. Tom, are you in a position, if Molly pulls up the slides, that you can begin?
Sure, I'm good to
Great.
go.
Thank you so much. All right, so now we are ready for Tom's part of the presentation. So Molly, why don't you go ahead and move to the next slide, and then Tom will tell you when he wants to move to the additional slides. Take it away, Tom.
Sure. Well, hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. We're going to talk a little bit about buying an EV. This is just basically like a 3,000-foot flyover, just going over some of the basic terms about EVs, some of the EVs available, and about charging an EV. So why don't we move on? Okay, really quick. So who am I? I know I had a little bit of an introduction before. Let me go over it again. I've owned and driven EVs since 2009. Now, if you remember earlier on when there was that bar graph up showing how many EVs were in New Jersey, the furthest it went back was 2011. And there were, I think, 338 registered EVs in the state. So I had already been driving EVs for 2 years when that was taken. So I think there was around 100, 150 of them in the state when I started. Driven about 300,000 miles with my EVs. About 90% of those miles were powered by my home solar array on my roof. So out of all those miles, probably only about 25,000 miles actually used grid energy. So I'm have a high percentage of true zero emission driving, which I'm very proud of. I own and manage public charging stations in Montclair, New Jersey. I have a DC fast charger and a level 2 charger on the property. It was actually the first public charging station in the state of New Jersey. I installed it back in 2009 when there were like no EVs available. I'm an editor for Inside EVs, as mentioned earlier. I co-developed and implement an electric vehicle dealership training program called PlugStar for Plug-in America. We basically help dealers better understand and sell more electric cars. And as you can see that little picture on the right, I actually had the honor of doing a TED Talk at the 2017 Frankfurt Auto Show on the future of mobility. It was both one of the greatest days of my life and thrills, and also one of the most frightening things, getting up on that TED stage, but it worked out really well. Okay, let's go to the next slide. All right, so why do you want to buy an EV? You know, you're used to gas cars. They're convenient. You know how to refuel them. You don't have to think about it. Number one, they're very powerful. One of the things that early on people didn't realize about electric cars, they thought they'd be slow and weak. It's the complete opposite. You've got instant power and torque on demand. They're smooth. They have quiet rides. And they actually handle better than internal combustion engine cars, because the heaviest part of the vehicle, the battery, is below the passenger compartment. So it gives the cars a very low center of gravity. So they actually perform and handle better. They're cleaner, which I think a lot of people here listening in tonight would appreciate. Cleaner air, healthier environment, pair it with solar like I do, and drive on sunshine. Everywhere, we like to say. That's because more DC fast charging stations are being installed every month. Eve was talking a little bit about that before. She's going to come back and talk about the goals, but you notice she said that there were level 2 charging stations and DC fast charging stations that the state's going to be installing. The DC fast charging stations that she mentioned are going to have a minimum of 150 kilowatt delivery. She also said that there's 65 that are existing that don't meet that criteria. That's because the early DC fast charge stations that have been installed over the last, say, 5 or 6 years, they were lower powered stations. They only delivered about 50 kilowatts of power. The new benchmark for charging stations is minimum charging. The power that they can deliver is 150 kilowatts. So it's 3 times as fast. These stations can also deliver up to 350 kilowatts. Now, a car that can accept that much power basically needs to stop for about 10 minutes to get about 200 to 250 miles of range. So we're at the point now where refueling your electric car is nearly as quick as it is refueling a gas car. And they're cheaper. Here in the state of New Jersey, with federal and state incentives, they're up to $15,000 or more on the off of an electric vehicle. We like to say you plug in overnight and you wake up with a full tank and a preheated cabin in the winter. You set the car to warm itself during right before you're going to get into it. You can't really do that with a gas car if you're inside a garage, because you'll get carbon monoxide in the house. But you can do that with an electric car because there's no emissions. And we also like to say it's like paying around $1 per gallon, because people always ask, how do these compare with gas cars as far as what it costs to fuel? People don't really understand kilowatt hour. How much do they pay per kilowatt hour in their house, and how many kilowatt hours it is going to power the car? They understand gas, they understand miles per gallon. So we like to put a comparison on it. Depending on what you're paying for your electricity, it's kind of like paying $1 per gallon, which even at today's extremely low rates, gasoline rates, it's still cheaper. And also there's less maintenance and wear. The battery warranties, people are always concerned about battery warranties. The very robust battery warranties. Most manufacturers warranty their battery for at least 100,000 miles, many are 150,000 miles. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so EV basics. And I like to do this because some people sometimes are confused about what electric cars are. There's so many hybrids that are out on the market now, and the manufacturers, I think, sometimes purposely, obfuscate the how the vehicle works. Lexus is actually really good at that. They talk about self-charging hybrids, but if it doesn't have a plug, it's not an electric vehicle. It's a hybrid gas car. If it's a hybrid, it needs to run 100% of the time on gasoline. They do have small batteries in them, which help get better gas mileage, but it never runs purely on electricity. If you can't plug the car in, it is not an electric car. Okay, so now you can plug it in. There's two different types of electric cars. There's battery electric vehicles, which are BEVs, we call them. They're all electric. They don't have any gasoline, no other fueling method on the vehicle. For those vehicles, there's typically higher incentives available. There's much less maintenance and lower total cost of ownership. They work great for consumers that can charge at home or work. They can be a little bit of a difficult for some people if you don't have the ability to plug in at home. Now, I'm not saying you can't buy a BEV if you live in an apartment, because the public charging infrastructure is getting better and better now. But if you do have residents where you can plug in at home, it's a lot easier to live with a battery electric vehicle today. Okay, the other type of electric vehicles are plug-in hybrids, or PHEVs. They have electric and gas powertrains. There are incentives available for some models, not for all of them. They have lower maintenance than gas cars, higher maintenance than BEVs, but lower maintenance than fully gas cars. And they're suitable for all customer commutes and trips. You can do anything with a plug-in hybrid because you can plug it in, or you can just put gas in it. If for some reason you're going on a really long trip and you can't find a fast charger in the area, you can basically do anything with a plug-in hybrid. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so, what's the right EV for you? We get asked this question a lot. And the thing is, I mean, it's hard to tell anybody what the right car is for them, let alone what the right EV is, because we all have different needs. Obviously, you have to look at your budget. And when you look at the budget, we say, please don't look at the MSRP, because if you look at the MSRP of an electric vehicle, it'll never look good, because the MSRP, it doesn't tell the whole story. You have got to look at the incentives. Incentives can be more than $15,000 in the state of New Jersey. You get the $7,500 federal tax credit, and now with the new state rebates up to $5,000. And in the state of New Jersey, BEVs, that's the fully electric cars, are sales tax exempt. So you get $7,500 from the government, $5,000 from the state, and sales tax exempt. You can easily $15,000, $16,000. So don't just look at that sticker. It doesn't tell the whole story. They have a much lower refueling cost. We talked about that before. We have a lot lower maintenance. When you buy an electric car, they don't say bring it in 5,000 miles for an oil change and 15,000 miles to change some belts or whatever. They basically will tell you, well, bring it in if you have a problem, because there's no regularly scheduled maintenance. Maybe rotate your tires, change your wiper blades, but you never have to go back to the dealer unless something breaks. And I think people like that. That's why we say always look at the total cost of ownership. You might have to take a little time to figure it out, but even if you pay $2,000, $3,000 more upfront for an electric vehicle, after 3 years, you're going to be way ahead. We have this plugstar.com tool, which is the dealership certification training that I do. You can just go to plugstar.com and it fully explains how the electric vehicle will compare to an internal combustion vehicle and the savings you'll have. What are your driving demands? How far do you need to drive every day? Do you do frequent long trips? This is one thing that I love to tell people, well, if you're not sure if you can live with an electric vehicle, say that has a 150-mile range, keep a little daily log. Get a log book, put it in your car every day, write down the amount of miles you drove, and then reset your trip, the trip meter. Do that for like a month, and then you'll see what's the furthest you drove at any one given day. So, that's one of the things that I like to tell people to do. Charging availability. Do you have control of your electric supply? I explained to you that if you have a home or private residence where you can plug in, it makes it easier. There is public charging, but it does make it easier. A lot of people now can charge at work. There's employers in New Jersey like ADP that are installing charging stations for their employees, and public charging is rapidly expanding. Why don't we go to the next slide? Okay, so really quickly, this is just a quick example of the vehicles that are available in New Jersey right now, the battery electric vehicles and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, how far they go, what their MSRP is, and how much money you can get off them right now. You take a look at the Chevy Bolt. There's $16,000 of incentives off a $36,000 car. You can get a $36,000 car for $20,000. Hyundai Kona, it's almost $15,000. The Ford Mach-E, which is coming soon, it's same thing, $15,000. You look at the plug-in hybrids, as you see, the incentives are a little bit less, but these vehicles, have gas and electric powertrains. And I also wrote that how many electric miles you can go before the gasoline engine turns on. So take a look at the Honda Clarity plug-in hybrid, for instance. It goes over almost 50 miles before the gas engine turns on. And right now, after incentives, you can get it for a little over $20,000. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So charging your EV at home. All of the electric vehicles today come with a portable charger, and it is typically level 1 charger, which is 120 volts. You can plug that into any household outlet. So yes, you can charge your electric car from your household outlet, but it will take a long time. That's why many people install a level 2 charging station at their house, which is 240 volts. Take a look at the time that I have written down there. Level 1 charger, you only get about 3 to 5 miles of range per hour. So overnight, you might get 40 or 50 miles of range. Level 2 charger, the car's always fully charged when you wake up in the morning. So that's why some people install level 2 chargers. That little picture you see of me, that's my garage. I test out those chargers for the companies that make them. And those are all level 2 chargers. Your garage wouldn't look like that. Don't worry, if you get an electric car, you'd have one of those and that would be enough. So if the level 1 charger that comes with the car isn't enough for you, if it's not going to charge the car fast enough, then you want to upgrade to a level 2 charger. And you'll match the charger with your needs, depending on how far you need to drive every day, what your costs are, and what you want. There's so many different chargers out there now, that have different options. You need to do a little bit of research, but they cost somewhere between $300 and $800. The BEVs have larger batteries. They need more electricity. So fully electric vehicles, you're typically going to buy one of these level 2 chargers. But if you have a plug-in hybrid, it probably is going to be enough just to use the charger that comes with the car, and you'll just plug it into an outlet in your garage. You don't have to buy anything with a plug-in hybrid. But as I said, the BEVs have bigger batteries. They go further. So you're probably going to want to buy a level 2 charger. Let's go to the next slide. So really quickly here, I wanted to just show maintenance costs. Now, this was a study that was done by New York City. This was their all of their entire fleet of vehicles in 2018. These are the cost comparison for maintenance. And you know, the city of New York, the people that drive those cars they get beaten up. They much more you know, use than what we would normally drive our cars in, and probably don't get taken care of as well. Take a look at the top 3 cars. They're all fully electric cars. The lowest maintenance on the entire fleet of vehicles were the full battery electric cars. And take a look at the third one down. You'll see the Ford Focus all electric, $386 for the year in maintenance. Now go all the way down to the bottom. That's the Ford Focus gas. So it's the same exact vehicle. Perfect comparison. The one that's electric costs $386 a year in maintenance. The one that's gas costs $1,800. So nearly 5 times as much in maintenance for the same vehicle. So, you know, while your savings might not be as much because you take care of your car better than people that drive these in the city for public use, but you can see right there, over 4 or 5 years, you're going to save a couple $1,000s in maintenance on your vehicle. Okay, so that's pretty much what my presentation. I'm going to be around here to answer your questions, and we'll turn it back to Eve, and hopefully she can finish hers now.
Hey, that's great, Eve. If you could get yours going again, hopefully you've got a more stable connection now. We'd love to hear your presentation. The rest.
Yeah, so I'm actually just going to share my video, and there we go, and not share my presentation because I think I can do it all verbally from here.
Okay.
And I'm keeping my phone nearby, so Perry will let me know if there are any issues. I'm sorry about that. I'm actually going to pick back up at the sort of golden egg of this electric vehicle bill, which is the EV rebate program, which you just heard Tom speak about. And I saw that someone actually just asked a question, what are the eligibility requirements? So this EV rebate program gave $30 million per year, which is allocated over the next decade. So in total, there are $300 million for this rebate program. The rebate program provides cash on the hood rebates. So you walk into the dealership once this is fully up and running, and the price gets taken right off the cost of the vehicle. The rebate is up to $5,000 depending on the range of your vehicle. So if your vehicle can drive 200 miles on a charge, it can get that full $5,000 rebate. And this is only available for vehicles with an MSRP below $55,000. So this is not a rebate for luxury vehicles. And it's only for cars sold in New Jersey and for residents of New Jersey. I am now going to talk a bit about some of the barriers to EV adoption and how the law is sort of addressing those general barriers. And Tom talked about all of these actually, so I will try not to repeat him too much. The first one is range anxiety, which Tom went through. So the goal to have 1,000 level 2 charging stations and 200 DC fast charging station locations is really meant to address that range anxiety concern. People should be able to feel comfortable driving their electric vehicles and knowing that there's a charging station nearby that they can access, and people should be able to access one in an emergency, of course. So the biggest thing that the state is doing to put more charging stations on the road is the Department of Environmental Protection has the It Pays to Plug In program. So the It Pays to Plug In program gives grants for level 2 and more recently for DC fast charging stations. And a lot of municipalities have interest in installing these and don't really know where to get started. So they go to the DEP, and the DEP is able to provide them with funding. Another thing that we at Charge EVC are working on with the Department of Environmental Protection and the DCA is creating model ordinances. New Jersey is kind of notorious or infamous for it being really hard to permit for charging stations, public charging stations in the state. So if we want to reach those really lofty goals, we need to make it easier and fast track that permitting process. And Princeton was actually involved in some of the preliminary conversations there. And the last thing I would be remiss if I didn't talk about is Sustainable Jersey and Sustainable Princeton are working to sort of combat issues, sort of combat range anxiety by creating an action for publicly accessible charging infrastructure. So giving municipalities information and incentivizing them and making them understand why it's important to have that charging infrastructure. So those are some of the things that are happening to combat that first barrier, range anxiety. The next one I'm gonna talk through is affordability. A lot of people think that electric vehicles are luxury vehicles, and I don't need to go through all of this again because Tom just explained that that is the case in some cases, but it's not the case in most cases. And really the biggest thing that the state is trying to do to combat that affordability issue is the rebate program. So Tom talked about it. I went over the elements of it, and it's actually been, since its inception in January, it's been very successful. The BPU who runs the rebate program, it's called Charge Up New Jersey. They just released some data that said that 1,800 people applied for the rebate, which we were very, very impressed with, especially considering we're in the middle of a pandemic and an economic downturn. That's very, those are really good numbers. And we also got a little bit more data from them that said that most of those, we don't know exactly how many, were for $5,000, which means in this time of economic uncertainty, the program's been in place, not in full effect yet, for about 9 months. Most people were buying full electric vehicles. So that's really exciting. I have 3 main barriers. So the first one was range anxiety. The second was affordability. The third was awareness and education. So Tom and I work together on the Plug Star Dealer Certification Program. Tom gets most of the credit there. He does the training. But that's a big part of awareness. Dealers are where people get a lot of education about their cars. So we need to make sure that at that point of contact, dealers have information on if you're the right fit for a certain electric vehicle, if you're the right fit for an electric vehicle at all, you know, what type of charger do you need? You know, what will change in your daily schedule. So that's really important. Also, something that Sustainable Princeton is doing, ride and drives are really effective. I have hosted a few ride and drives, and my table to sign up for the ride and drive always has the longest line. People are very excited to get into these vehicles. And we've seen through data, through surveys, through just talking to people also, that it's really effective. Once someone sits in an electric vehicle and drives it, it really changes their opinion. And the last way to address this awareness issue is time. You see people driving the cars, talking about them, you see charging stations, and it really, sort of changes your perspective. So that's working with us. Time is good. So I just wanted to go over a few other initiatives that you may find interesting going on in the state. First is the partnership to plug in. So Governor Murphy created a partnership between the Department of Environmental Protection, the Board of Public Utilities, and the Economic Development Authority, so that these three agencies would really work in sync and not duplicate efforts on electrification. And that's really important in a state that's trying to be a national leader. And if not a national leader because of the West Coast, absolutely, we are an East Coast leader now. So that was a really important partnership to establish. Also, New Jersey rejoined RGGI when Governor Murphy came into office. That's the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. So we're going to have about $180 million over the next year to put towards clean energy projects. And the majority of that money, 60%, is going to the Economic Development Authority, which is spending all of that money on medium and heavy duty electrification projects, which is really important. And the last thing that I will quickly mention is Atlantic City Electric and PSE&G, which you are in PSE&G's territory in Princeton. I'm in their territory in Highland Park. They both have utility filings in at the Board of Public Utilities to build out electric vehicle infrastructure. So as we see those filings go through, hopefully approved, that will put a whole nother category of investment into EV infrastructure. So I hope you heard me for the rest of that presentation.
We did, Eve. Thank you very much. We really appreciate that. And so now I know that we already have a lot of questions coming in, but if you have any more burning questions, feel free to put them in at any time. And don't forget that if you see a question in the Q&A that you want to ask as well, you can click that thumbs up to upvote it, and that helps us prioritize the questions. So now if Tom and Eve could be with me with their video on, we'll dive right into those questions. And thank you both for your presentations. So let's start with the first one that we have at the top of the list is from Alex Fuller-Young. And he's asking about something that is I'm curious about as well. He's wanting to know about the gaps in customer experience right now for someone purchasing an EV at a typical car dealership. So is there room for improvement in connecting that customer with products and services like chargers and charger installation, electricity plans, and network charging subscriptions? So Tom, do you want to start with that one?
Sure. So yeah, there's a lot of room for improvement. It's one of the things that the Plug Start program is doing, and what Eve and I are working on is to try to improve the dealership experience. Now, one of the things I like to point out is that many people kind of blame the dealers and say, well, they don't like electric cars, they don't want to sell them. And the fact of the matter is that dealers will sell whatever people want to buy, and they also want to do so the easiest way. Electric cars pose a problem because it's new, and there's new questions, and there's new things to learn. And just like your question here about electricity, time of use plans, and EV chargers, the people that work at the dealerships, the salespeople, they don't have to worry about any of that stuff for their other cars. So now, they have 10 cars to sell, but one of them, they have to learn about electricity rates and how to charge the car and how long the batteries last. So, unfortunately, quite often people neglect the electric car because, it's just a pain to sell. I have to learn all this new information. So in a nutshell, yes, there's a lot of room for improvement. It's what the Plug Star program that even are working on is meant to do. Help New Jersey dealers better understand electric cars so they can communicate all of this information to the customer, electricity rates, chargers, all that stuff.
Yeah, and that was, it's good to hear you talk about that, because that was my experience also when I bought my electric car. I think it was 2 years ago. I absolutely love my electric car, but the worst part about it was buying the car at that time, because there was a limited number of dealers who understood the electric vehicle. So I'm sure that that's changing rapidly. Do you have anything, Eve, to add to that?
No, I think Tom covered it.
Okay, great. That's good. So another question that's popping up quickly that I know is on a lot of people's minds is the cost of charging. So let's say you want to get this electric vehicle, you understand that the maintenance costs are cheaper, you've got these incentives, but you do still have to bring charging to your home in most cases. So what is the cost of bringing a level 2 charger into your home and associated doing that? And Tom, would you like to start with that one?
Sure. So most of these level 2 chargers plug in. So you don't have to have an electrician hardwire them. The only thing you have to do is have a 240 volt outlet installed in your garage. Should cost about $200 to $300. But that can depend on if you have the extra capacity in your service panel. You need to have a qualified licensed electrician come to your house and tell you how much it's going to cost to install the outlet in your garage. So once the outlet is installed, you choose the charging station you want. Some of them cost $300. Some of them cost $800. They have all different bells and whistles. You can get a basic charger that charges your car really quickly for like $300, $350. The outlet might cost $200. You might already have an outlet in your garage, a 240 volt outlet for, a clothes dryer or something like that.
Great. Okay. Yeah. Eve, anything to add? I think you covered it.
Yeah. Tom, you're so thorough.
Right. The only other thing that I would add is that it might depend on where your garage is in relation to your utility box. I know in my case, the garage was at the opposite end of the house. So that did increase the cost slightly because they had to run a wire from there. But
Exactly.
yeah, that being
Yeah.
said, I think your estimates were right on.
It shouldn't be more than a few $100s, to be honest with you, and even if it's on the other side of your house, if someone's charging you more than $300 or $400 to install an outlet in your garage, call another electrician.
Right. Okay, great. So let's move on to another one. We've got a question about the environmental benefits of electric vehicles. So this is from an anonymous attendee. They're saying, while powering an EV can reduce air pollution, the electric grid is still getting a large percentage of its power from fossil fuel sources in New Jersey. So can you elaborate on how we are actually doing a good thing for the environment with an electric vehicle in that case? Eve, are you interested?
Yeah, I can start with that one. So I'd say that's definitely something to be concerned about, especially if you're in a place where the electricity sources are dirty. And in New Jersey, we do have room for improvement, but we are one of the cleaner states, and we are getting cleaner. So we are increasing electricity from solar, we're increasing electricity from wind. And we specifically at Charge EVC, since we work on New Jersey issues, we know that including electricity generation, driving an EV is 70 to 80% cleaner in the state.
Great.
There's one thing that I'd like people that are interested to point out that they can go to. The Union of Concerned Scientists has done a lot of work on this. And if you go, they have an article written, Cleaner Cars from Cradle to Grave. And in that article, there's a link you can click on that says, how clean is your EV? And you put in your zip code where you live, and it literally shows you if you drove a gas car, a plug-in hybrid, or an electric car, how much your carbon emissions are going to be. And it's based on the electricity mix of where you live. It's not an estimate. They have the data of exactly your electricity, how it was produced, and what your carbon emissions would be. You could put in zip codes, any zip code in the country, and it pulls it all up. And one thing I will say is, even under the worst case situation where your electricity is powered 100% by coal, which is the worst fossil fuel you can get, an electric vehicle is still as good as the best gasoline car, which be like a Prius that gets 50 miles per gallon. So even in the worst case situation where you have the dirtiest electricity made, it still isn't, it still is as good as a gas car. So there's no place in this country where a gas car emits less emissions than an EV.
Right, great. Can you repeat that link again? The How
Sure.
Clean is Your EV? What was that?
So
I want to get that in the chat.
So the Union of Concerned Scientists did a study, and they call it cleaner cars from the cradle to the grave.
Great.
And they have a nice YouTube video that explains it too, attached to that article.
Okay, that's super. And maybe one of Molly or Christine, if you could be looking that up and getting it in the Q&A, I think that sounds like a great resource for people. All right, let's see what's next. Al Cavallo is asking us, the long range is important in making EVs acceptable to large numbers of people. Range is determined by EPA tests for city and highway driving patterns. So Al has found that without any notification to consumers, these test results are multiplied by a factor of 0.7, allegedly to account for real world use. So he thinks this figure seems like it's pulled out of thin air. What do you think about it, Tom?
Yeah, I've actually done a lot of work on this one topic, and I read Al's question. It just would have taken too long to type the answer, so this is the best way to answer it. So no, Al, this isn't something that was recently done, maybe by the current administration to, hoodwink EVs. This is how it's always been, and it's actually designed to give a more appropriate real world range under all different kind of driving conditions, because there's no one range. You can't, it's impossible to say, okay, this EV goes 200 miles, because it depends on so many factors: the ambient temperature, how fast you're driving, the topography, if you're going uphill. So what the EPA did was they give auto manufacturers two options on how they rate the range of their car, because the auto manufacturers do the range rating, not the EPA. They submit the data to the EPA, and then the EPA verifies it. So the manufacturers have two options. They can do a 2-cycle test, which is a city and a highway test, combine the two, and then discount it by 0.7 to account for if you live in a northern state where it's cold all the time, because EVs don't go quite as far when it's cold, or if you're driving at high speeds on the highway all the time, they don't go as far the higher the speed you get. So, or if the manufacturer doesn't, that's the lazy way of doing it. Or the manufacturer can do a 5-cycle test, and then they don't have to discount it at all, because 3 of the 5 cycles include cold soaking the battery to like 10 degrees for 10 hours, and then driving it, and then also doing more highway tests at high speed. So the manufacturers don't have to discount them to 7.7% of the range. They choose to do that. There's only 2 auto manufacturers today that do the hard way, that do the full testing, so they don't discount their range. That's Tesla and Audi. Everybody else simply says, I'll just do these 2 tests and then lock 30% off the range. Here's what we're submitting. So that it's not an EPA trick, Al. I read your comment. I understand where you're coming from, but that's not the truth. The truth is they really were trying to get an accurate range. And if you question that and say, well, it's easy to hit the EPA range. Over on Inside EVs, one of the things I do is 70-mile-an-hour highway tests for all the EVs rated today. So I've done a dozen or 2 of them. None of the EVs can actually match their EPA range rating. Well, actually, I lied. One did. It tied it. But at 70 miles an hour, even the EPA range rating that you think kind of is easy because they discounted it, no current EV can exceed its EPA range rating when driven at a constant 70 miles an hour. A lot of us drive 70 miles an hour on the highway. So that's why the EPA range rating has that deduction, because the EPA is trying to give consumers a fair estimate of what the average range might be. I hope that answered your question.
Thank you, Tom. I think that makes a lot of sense, but it does bring up another question. Are you saying that EVs burn more power at higher speeds?
Sure, gas cars do also. The faster you go, the more wind resistance, you're pushing that wind out of your way, and cars become less efficient. So, your gas car might get 30 miles per gallon driving 50 miles an hour, but at 75 miles an hour, you probably get 22 miles per gallon. It's the same with electric vehicles. They don't
largely the wind resistance.
You don't go quite as far the faster you drive.
Okay, that makes sense. Great. So we're going to skip back to tax credits, which will let us go back to Eve. I know you mentioned this before, and I believe you answered the eligibility requirements for the tax credit. You said that they mainly had to do with the amount of electricity that is getting used by the car, or the range of miles that can be covered by electricity. Did I get that right, Eve?
Yeah, so for the rebate,
Yeah.
right? I just want to make sure you're asking about the rebate. So, yeah, so
oh, you know
again,
what?
I'm getting my connections unstable, but am I here?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay. Just making sure. Sorry about that. Yeah, so based on the range of your vehicle, you get a higher rebate. So if your vehicle can drive 200 miles, you'll get the full $5,000 rebate. I might be getting this number wrong, but it's $25 for every 20 miles your car can drive. It's somewhere in that range. Tom can correct me if I got those numbers a bit wrong.
Yeah, it's, now I have to do the math. To get for 200 miles, you get the $5,000 rebate. So it's was it $5 per mile or $25 per mile? I actually forget. I'm drawing a blank. I'll look it up and I'll tell you in 1 second exactly how it works. But as Eve said, it's rated on how far the car can go on pure electric miles. So if your car can go 100 miles on electric, you'll get half the New Jersey rebate that a car that goes 200 miles can go on electric. Therefore, the plug-in hybrids that only go 20, 30, maybe 40 miles, they get a very small state rebate. But if your car can go more than 200 miles, you get the full $5,000, and it's cash on the hood. It's not, you don't have to wait, months and months and months later. It'll be a cash on the hood rebate.
Yeah, and I'll also just repeat those other eligibility requirements in case anyone missed it. You have to buy the car in New Jersey, and you also have to be a New Jersey resident. And the vehicle also has to be below $55,000.
So it's $25 per mile, okay, that you get. So if you get an EV that can go 100 miles, you get $2,500. If it goes 200 miles, $5,000. That's how it's structured. I can't believe it. Even I both know this really well. We both just had like brain farts on this because we talk about it all the time.
My excuse is the internet.
Well, I'm saying brain fart. That's my excuse.
Okay, so, and actually, I apologize, but the question was actually about the federal tax credit.
Okay.
So I'm glad that we talked about the state one because the state rebate, but what about the federal tax credit? Can we talk about that a little? There's another question also of why is the incentive less for the Teslas? And I think you could probably answer both of those questions at the same time. Yeah,
so Eve, do you want me to get this one or do you want to get it?
Go for it.
Okay. So the federal tax credit, you get up to $7,500, and it's based on the battery size. If you have a 16 kilowatt hour battery or greater, you qualify for the full $7,500 federal tax credit. It's a lot more complicated than the state of New Jersey, where it's 25 miles per range, that's really easy. The way the federal tax credit set up is the car has to have a minimum of, I think, 4 kilowatt hour battery. It's either 4 or 5. And at that point, you get a $2,500 tax credit. And then for every kilowatt hour of battery, you get another $416. So that between the 4 kilowatt hour and 16 kilowatt hour, it's 12 kilowatt hours. If you multiply that by 416, it should bridge the gap between the $2,500 base and the $7,500 maximum that you can get. And that's a federal tax credit. You pay the full amount for the car or you lease the car. And then when your taxes come in the following year, you get, it's not a tax deduction, it's a tax credit. So if you owe $7,500 in tax, you owe nothing. If you didn't owe anything, you'll get a $7,500 check back. So that's how the federal tax credit works. And I know there was a second part of that question, Jenny.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
so
it was looking
I
into Teslas and how
Yeah.
you get the rebates available with the and the incentives with the Teslas.
So when this when the federal tax credit started under the Bush administration, the way they wrote the law was that every manufacturer got 200,000 tax credits. So they got their first 200,000 electric vehicles they sold were eligible to get a tax credit. Once 200,000 hit, their tax credit went away. Tesla, a leader in electric vehicles, hit that number last year. So Tesla vehicles are no longer eligible for the federal tax credit. Chevrolet, or General Motors, actually, it's all General Motors cars, hit the tax credit limit about 6 months after Tesla. So Chevrolets are no longer available for the federal tax credit. I think it's very unfortunate because these are two American car companies and they can't get the federal tax credit while all of the foreign car companies that import their vehicles here are still eligible for federal tax credit. That law needs to be revisited and we need to change it. We need to sunset it after 2 or 3 years, but pool the tax credits. Don't punish the auto manufacturers that were leaders with electric vehicles and let their tax credits, expire. I don't believe we need to fully subsidize electric vehicles forever. I think we only need to for the next 3 or 4 years, because by 2024, 2025, they will be an easy choice over a gas car on its own merits without subsidies. But for now, the subsidies matter. And I think it's very unfair that the way the initial federal tax credit law was written.
Great. Yes, that makes a lot of sense. So thank you for that. So both the Tesla and the Chevy, even though they've lost that federal tax credit, they do still have the state rebate that all the electric vehicles could get, as you've already described. So at least New Jersey is helping with that, but they've lost the other component to it. Okay, so from William Silverman, he is asking about our next event. I'm happy to go ahead and give a little plug for our next event. He's asking about, how we're going to deal with the pandemic and the COVID exposure risk, which is a very good question. From the dealers, they're saying that they're going to be sanitizing the cars in between uses. The bikes also will be wiped down. And of course, masks are required by everyone attending the event. And we also have plenty of space in the parking lot and the courtyard for people to social distance. So we're doing everything we can in accordance with the health department to make this a successful and safe event for everybody. So please come and join us. All right, let's see what's next from Andy Weiss. There's a lot of activity in the EV market now with tons of new models coming online. So his family leased a Bolt this year to give us a few more years before buying outright. So what else is coming down the pike? He didn't want to take the plunge yet. I saw Tom, on the Inside EV website, there was recently an article on pickup trucks and, all kinds of things that look like they're coming. So can you tell us a little about it?
So unfortunately, you blanked out for me for like 10 seconds in the middle of that, what you were saying. I didn't hear that full question. I just heard the end where it said, could you tell me about electric pickup trucks and bikes?
Oh, sorry, my apologies. Hopefully you hear me now. He's asking about what is coming down the pike in the electric market.
Okay, so that's one of the things that I find really exciting. You know, back 10 years ago when I first started driving electric vehicles, everything that was coming out that was electric was like a little tiny hatchback that went 80 or 90 miles. And we're moved past that now. The electrification of our entire transportation fleet is beginning. Pickup trucks, within the next 2 years, we're going to have pickup trucks from Rivian, from Tesla, Ford's fully electric F-150s coming out in a year and a half. Chevy's going to have an electric pickup truck. We've got Lordstown, the SUVs, everything, electric buses, electric semi-trucks. It's begun. And the next 2 or 3 years, we're going to see EVs in all sizes and shapes, crossovers, SUVs, sedans. You know, we've moved beyond the little hatchback 100-mile EVs. Now we're getting all these cars that go 300, 350 miles per charge and have all different sizes and shapes, which is absolutely necessary for us to make this transition.
Super. Thank you for that. Okay, Kim Groom, I believe, is asking about the school systems. So I believe this one's going to go to you, Eve. Are there good models or examples of schools switching their fleets to electric? And I'm assuming there's a lot of complexities with that. Can you address that question? And you'll need to unmute first.
All right. I actually don't have an answer to that question because of what Jenny just alluded to. It's incredibly complex, and it's sort of an issue that we're working on figuring out. And it's actually an issue that there are a lot of opportunities. There are a lot of opportunities because these vehicles sort of travel a regular route. So it's something that can be unlocked eventually, and also because they're not being used over the weekends, at night, in the summer. So there are a lot of vehicle to grid opportunities. So unfortunately, I don't have a clean answer on that yet.
Oh, that's fine. Tom, would you have anything to add? Have you heard about this?
Not really, just, you know, I get people reach out to me from different school systems and municipalities that are very interested in electrifying their fleet. In most cases, they'll buy 1 or 2 electric vehicles just to give it a test run to see, you know, if it's going to work for them or not. You know, I know the Township of Montclair has been talking about for a while now, buying electric vehicles for their meter fleet and some municipal use. I don't know of any large scale programs yet, but I know a lot of the school systems and municipalities are doing pilot programs with like 1 EV just to test the waters to make sure it's going to be fine. You know, you don't want to buy 10 vehicles and then find out there's some kind of problem. That's prudent to you know, put your toe in the water first. But I think we're going to see that soon because it's going to save a tremendous amount of money from the budgets. Electric vehicles, it costs so much less to power and maintain that. I mean, there's a example of a police department that just bought 2 Tesla Model 3s, and they just did an analysis after the first year, and the vehicle saved them, I think, $7,000 over their other cruisers. So, and that's 1 vehicle for 1 year. You know, keep it for 3 or 4 years, and it paid for itself. It's a free vehicle. So we're gonna see electric vehicles in school systems and municipal fleets soon, and it's going to save taxpayers a lot of money. Wow,
that's great news. Good to hear. Okay. So from Philip Chow, he is wondering because he doesn't have a garage rather. So can he still do home charging? Is that an option? We had Scott chime in and say he's got 2 chargers outside of his house. I know even though I have a garage, I have mine outside of my house as well. Any issues with that you're aware of?
Absolutely not. Yeah, of course you could charge outside. Almost all of the chargers are outdoor rated. But when you do select the charger, just make sure it says it's outdoor rated because there's some less expensive, lower quality products you can buy online now, many of which come from China and aren't safety certified. So you want to make sure you buy a charger that's safety certified, outdoor rated, and then have an electrician install it. you've got no problem at all. You could charge I've charged my cars outside in snowstorms and driving rains. They're 100% safe.
Yeah, I remember the first time I got my EV and it was raining. My husband and I were furiously Googling whether or not we were allowed to charge it in the rain. And yes, of course, I now know that it's fine. Somehow it is.
It's totally fine. The only thing I'll qualify was if it's a lightning storm, I suggest you don't leave your car plugged in, because if there's a direct lightning strike near your house, and I know there's safety systems built into the car, into your house, but it's possible that you could do damage to the car if there's some kind of a lightning strike very close to your house. So I tell people, if it's bad lightning storm, unplug the car, just to be safe.
Yeah, that makes sense. Definitely. Okay, we've got another question from Gabel, I believe. We would like to buy an electric minivan or a big electric car for family trips. Is that an option yet? Tom, what do you think?
Well, it depends on what your budget is. There are electric SUVs available. The Audi e-tron's available. Audis are expensive vehicles. So, it's not going to be a $20,000 car. But the lower cost SUVs and crossovers are coming. Volkswagen, for instance, is going to be bringing out the ID.4, which is a family crossover. It's not a large SUV, but it's a family crossover, fairly large. And with incentives in New Jersey here, it's going to cost about $25,000, $26,000. So, the larger people movers are coming. There's some available now, but they are on the higher price end. So it really depends what your budget is. You may be able to buy one right now, or you may have to wait a year or two before the prices come down a little bit for these larger family haulers.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that. Anything to add to that, Eve?
You've got it, Tom.
Yeah. Okay, good. Eve, maybe you could do the next one from John Vadney. My apologies. What about health issues around the batteries and large electric currents? Have you seen any studies regarding that?
I have not seen any studies or any proof of that. I don't know if Tom has something to add there.
I haven't seen any studies. I know there was talk about this years ago, like 7 or 8 years ago, when electric vehicles were just starting to take off. I saw plenty of engineers, just comment like, no, that's not a concern. I think if it was a problem, we would know about it by now. There'd be studies, there'd be, people sounding the alarm. I can't imagine there being an issue with that we wouldn't know about already.
Right, that makes sense to me. Okay, so Heidi is asking, we already talked about things that can degrade the battery faster in the short term, like cold, like driving at a high speed. But what about the actual charging of a car? Do DC fast chargers degrade the battery faster? Do either of you have any info on that one?
I do, but I feel like I'm really hogging this. Eve, would you like to take this, or would you like me to do it?
No, this is your expertise.
Yeah, it is, but I feel bad.
So yeah, I'm learning too.
So as we mentioned earlier, the cold weather and having a cold battery reduces your range, but it's temporary. It doesn't harm the battery. What harms the battery is heat. And if the battery gets too hot, that's when it degrades faster than it normally will. When you charge a battery or discharge a battery, it creates heat. But the batteries have these built-in thermal management systems designed to keep the battery cool or warm, depending on what it needs. So these cars are made to handle DC fast charging. Now, if you exclusively DC fast charge 2-3 times a week, you're driving 500 miles a week, 600 miles a week, and you're just constantly DC fast charging, your battery will degrade faster than somebody who does DC fast charges once a month or something like that. Now, not to scare you, it might mean, if you and I both bought the same electric car, 4 years from now, I never DC fast charged, and you DC fast charged once a week, every week for 4 years. My car, my battery might be at 90%, and your battery will be at 82%. So yes, it will degrade the battery slightly faster, but not enough to say like ruin the car. It will just mean that after 4 or 5 years, your battery will have degraded a little bit more than someone who owns a battery that doesn't DC fast charge all the time. The key here is these batteries are designed for automotive use. These aren't the battery that you have in your cell phone. They're meant to charge and discharge at high rates. They're meant to last a long time. The manufacturers warranty them for 100,000, 150,000 miles. So, is it something that you should be cognizant of? Yes. But if you can charge at home, you're almost never going to use DC fast charger. I DC fast charge my car like once a month because every day I leave my house and it's fully charged. So I don't need to rely on DC fast charge infrastructure. I only charge when I'm going on, like when I'm driving to Vermont or Washington, DC in my car, then I need to rely on infrastructure. Most people that have the ability to charge at home will very rarely use public infrastructure. It needs to be there in case you need it, but you'll very rarely use it.
Right, and that's been my experience as well. Eve, turning to you, what is the plan with the DC fast chargers getting installed in New Jersey? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, so first, I just wanted to reiterate Mark's point on this. We absolutely need charging stations and fast chargers. And I saw someone ask a question about when are charging stations going to be, as easy to find as a gas station. But I think we sort of have to rewire our brains around how we're going to be fueling these vehicles. Like Tom said, he fuels at night, and 95% of the time is completely fine and gets home again at night without having to recharge. So having as many charging stations as we have gas stations is not necessarily the answer. And then to answer Jenny's question, as I mentioned earlier, the It Pays to Plug In program is really sort of trying to push fast charging infrastructure. So they just got a ton of applications for charging stations, and they've actually sort of set up a map to make sure that there's full coverage around the state. And this map has fast charging stations about 20 miles apart from each other. This 20-mile range sort of came from a roadmap that we worked on that figured out that 75% of drivers in New Jersey drive on 42 roads in New Jersey. It's a pretty dense state. So we're unique in this case, but if we put charging stations 20 miles apart on those 42 roads, then almost everyone will be able to access one in very close range. So there's an answer. We've sort of done the math on this, and now the state is trying to push to make sure that we have full coverage.
Great. Yeah, and so that makes sense, with Tom's comment of, he barely uses it when he's driving, unless he's driving to Vermont. So they will be on the major arteries to support that transition as well, to, build the range when you're doing longer range trips, but not necessarily for your daily trips, I would think. So that's great. Thank you for that answer. Okay.
Jenny, I just saw a really good question, if you don't mind me jumping in really quickly. So somebody said electric, that I said earlier that you're charging your EV at home is equivalent to paying like $1 per gallon for gas. But he asked, but how about when you charge on the road at public charging stations? So yes, it's obviously going to be more because you're paying for a service. And these stations are very expensive to install. So the networks that install them need to charge more than what they're paying for the electricity. When you're charging at home, you just have to pay for your electricity. So to make a long story short, it's very difficult to answer that question because there's no consistent pricing right now with DC fast charging. There's a bunch of different networks. There's EVgo, there's ChargePoint, there's Electrify America, there's Green Lots. They all charge different amount. And what you need to do is get an app, PlugShare or ChargeWay. These apps tell you where the charging stations are, and they also tell you how much they charge. So you might find a charging station a mile away that's half the price than the one that you're at. So you do a little bit of research. If you're going on a long distance trip and you use, like I said, and I use public charging once every month or so, it doesn't really matter to me if I pay $10 to charge the car or $15 for that one event. But if you're using public charging all the time, let's say you live in an apartment, you have to rely on it, that's when you're going to have to get a little creative. You're going to have to find the charging stations in your area that charge less and use them.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. We already, most people are accustomed to doing that with the gas stations as well. But obviously it's a little easier because they have the price on their sign. Okay, that is that one. All right, good. So now we're moving on to what are our options? And this is something we all have to think about, but what are the options when our area is hit by a storm that knocks out electricity?
I have to take this one, Eve. I'm sorry. I know I'm totally hogging this. And I'll tell you why. You remember when Superstorm Sandy hit back, when was it, 2011, 2012? I'm not sure. The New York Times did a full page story on me. And because I had an electric car and nobody had a power in New York and New Jersey, if you remember, we were knocked out during Sandy, but I was driving around without a problem. Remember all those gas lines, people standing up down the block with gas cans, you couldn't refill your car. So, guess what? When there's no electricity, you can't pump gas either. So gas stations have a problem just like you have a problem filling your electric car. But with electricity, there's a lot of ways you can make it. With gasoline, there's only one way you can get it, and that's going to a gas station. If they're not pumping it, you're not getting it. But I had a generator set up at my house, a natural gas generator. So I was charging my car fine and driving around. I was driving right by the gas stations with the lines of hundreds of cars and not having a problem. And, you can always find an outlet somewhere, even if you have to drive to your mother's house 3 towns away. Generally when there's electric outage, it's not everywhere. There's some place where that has electricity, and people with electric cars were finding places where they could charge their car. So the crazy thing about that was during that crazy power outage, when half the state had no power, the people with electric cars were driving around just fine. It was the people with the gassers that were waiting online, trying to get gas, driving to Pennsylvania to fill up gas cans. And you know what I'm talking about because we all lived through Sandy and it was tough. So it's actually not that difficult because you can find a place to get electricity when there's a power outage.
Thank you for that. And Eve, I'm guessing you do have a story to share, but in the interest of time, we are going to go ahead and just skip and try to get 2 more questions in so we can get everybody in bed tonight. And what I'd like to talk about are home chargers. We talked about the potential costs, but are there reimbursements or rebates available for home chargers? Eve, are you aware of any?
So the utilities, I talked about the utility filings, and the utilities are interested in providing rebates for those living in their territories. Also, through the law that was passed, the BPU was given, I'm sorry, the BPU was given authority to provide $500 rebates, and that is under development. So for personal charging stations, there isn't a state rebate right now.
Okay.
There is a federal tax rebate that you can apply for that expires this year, at the end of this year. So if you do buy a home charging station in before the end of the year, you can get a tax credit on it. I think it's up to $500, either $300 or $500. I'm not exactly sure. You can definitely look that up online, but there is a federal tax deduction that you can take right now for home charging equipment.
Great, thank you. So one more, the one I'd like to end on is a prediction one. So we'll hopefully end on a high note. What are the predictions for the new and improved battery technology? So when are we going to get these 350, 400, 500 mile range vehicles? Do you see that happening in the next 10 years, maybe? Eve, what are
It's
your—
a Tom question.
Oh, okay, Tom, we're back to you. Sorry.
So Lucid Motors just announced that's a new electric car company like Tesla out of California. They're launching a car in about 6-7 months, and it goes 517 miles per charge. It's an expensive vehicle, but it goes. We have a 500-mile car now. Teslas already go. The Tesla Model S has a 402 mile range rating. And they're saying that by next year, that's going to be over 500 miles also. So their ranges are here. Now, they're expensive cars, but we also have cars that are in the $30,000 and $40,000 range that are about 300-mile range. Like a Hyundai Kona, for instance, I was talking about earlier, it goes 258 miles per charge, and it's about $36,000. Now, with the state and federal rebate, you can have that car for $22,000, $23,000, and it goes, 260 miles per charge, which, if you can plug it in every day, 260 miles of range is as good as 500 miles of range. Who drives more than 260, 300 miles every day? I mean, if you do, move closer to your job. But, it gets to a point where it's too much range. You don't need to have a car that goes 1,000 miles and can tow 20,000 pounds, because you don't tow things usually, and you don't drive 1,000 miles between refills. So I think there's a gap between the perceived need and the actual need. And 250 to 300 miles, those vehicles are available today, and they're more than enough for better than 90% of the population.
Great. Thank you. All right. Well, I appreciate both of you. I'd love to hand it back to Molly now so we can wrap the program up. And I want to thank both of you very much for your participation.
All right, thank you all for joining us this evening. Just a reminder that on October 9th from 4 to 7 p.m. we'll be hosting our electric vehicle ride and drive at the Princeton Shopping Center. We hope you're able to join us then. More details are available on our website. Thank you. Have a good evening.